Hey everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about how to go about writing an introduction and a conclusion for a research paper. We're going to talk about how these are maybe a little bit different than the ones that you are used to writing. So by the end of this video, your goal is to understand how to structure your research paper's introduction and conclusion. And the reason that we want to do this is not only so you know how to write it, but also as you keep reading academic articles, you'll be able to unpack their introductions and conclusions much more effectively. Because for a lot of articles, you can mostly read the introduction and conclusion and kind of be done. So pro tip, in the future, people are going to be like, read all these articles, just read the intro, read the conclusion, and then skim the rest. Okay, so let's jump into it. What are the elements of an introduction for a research paper? There are three. Take notes, write them down. The main goal for an introduction is to tell your to tell your people, your readers, what your essay is about. And we're going to start by doing that in a context paragraph. After we have our context paragraph, we'll move into our thesis paragraph, and we'll move into our roadmap paragraph. So these could be three distinct paragraphs. They could be blended. They could be 2 paragraphs. They could be 4 paragraphs. Your context paragraph could take 3. Then your thesis could take 1. And then your roadmap could be condensed into your thesis. But these are the sort of 3 core elements that you need. And for this paper, I think it would just be easier to put them in a paragraph just so you get the practice. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more depth about what they are. Oh, your thesis one's the most important. Oh, yeah, and one other thing too. Your thesis is the most important, but also this is a general rule of thumb. It's not a rule, but it weirdly kind of works. My first year English teacher told me this way back when I started this, and it's basically that an introduction is about 10% of your overall essay. If you write a 25-page paper, about 2.5 pages are going to be introduction. If it's 10 pages, about 1 page. It weirdly works. It's kind of funny. Anyway. Let's get into it. What does a context paragraph require? It requires basically 3 elements. We want a hook that is on your topic, that it's about your topic, that it's going to keep us on focus. You don't just want a random interesting thing. You need to use your hook as a way of introducing us to your overall topic, because then that can start to segue into the background that readers are going to need about that topic. So if you introduce something about the deep sea, then you can start giving us, more details about, why deep sea life matters, what deep sea life is, when it was discovered, if that's relevant. But the background you need to give is the background that's going to be relevant to establish the problem that you're going to tackle. And honestly, these are going to go very closely hand in hand. You don't need to give just random background. You need to give background that is related to the problem that you are going to be talking about. So let's look at it. Like if you just look at this paragraph, it seems overwhelming. It's just all of this text, but it's actually doing those 3 things. So if we look at the purple, that is what is trying to operate as our hook. I think we could all maybe potentially argue that it could be a little bit stronger, because it kind of ultimately feels like the background information to the problem. It actually feels like the problem itself, TBH. But they were trying for it to be a hook. They were trying to make those 2 things go together. You could argue its effectiveness. Did it make you interested in reading? If the answer is no, then make the hook stronger. You can see how they're splitting up their information, maybe in a way that's not always helpful. Maybe the yellow could keep with the yellow, because this is trying to establish all of the background. And then this is really trying, again, to establish the problem that we're trying to introduce and talk about, which is that, marine biologists want to discuss the relevance of deep sea animals to life outside the ocean. The problem is, do animals in the deep sea actually teach us anything about evolution on land? Okay, let's look at it, because now we're going to start moving into our thesis paragraph, which is, again, the most important paragraph in the entire paper. And it, again, also has 3 elements. Write them down. The first thing is going to establish the research question or questions. What are you trying to prove? What question is motivating this? What do you want to know about that problem? And from there, you'll be able to establish what other scholars have said. Some scholars say this, other scholars say this, other scholars say that, other scholars say, blah, 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 blah. But the goal here is to establish what your research question is and summarize the stuff from your essay that's going to try to answer this, because that will then set up what you're going to say. Scholarship says this, this, and this. I argue blah. And so let's look at it again. So again, if we look at this, it seems overwhelming until you realize that they're doing 3 distinct things here in that order. Deep sea animal adaptation, while intriguing, poses the question, here it is, whether or not it can explain or predict the adaptation processes of animals from other environments. Hey, cool, that's a research question. And then we get our answers. Some marine biologists argue blah, other marine biologists argue blah, and others, there it is, in the middle say blah, 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 blah. And then you're going to have the final thing. I argue that deep sea animal adaptation proves that animals can potentially evolve to survive in any environment. Topic claim. Because, and here's our rationale, marine biologists have blah, 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 blah. You can read it on your own. See? So taking this information that seems really overwhelming, it actually is something that's fairly easy to understand. And if you know what to look for, you can skim through that pretty quickly. Okay, then we're going to move into our final element, which is oftentimes the most confusing because you probably have never had to write one of these before, and that's called a roadmap paragraph. And a roadmap paragraph, just like a roadmap in real life, directs you where to go. It tells you how to move through something to arrive at the proper destination. So usually, like most things, it has 3 elements, although these aren't as rigid as the other ones. The first is usually like, how are you going to prove that? How are you, and this will focus kind of on your evidence. You have your thesis, I'm going to argue blah. Well, how? How are you going to do that? And then you're going to use that as a way of talking about how you will summarize, or how you will break your essay into sections that you will then summarize. You know, my first section does this, my second section does this, my third section does this. And then at the end, you'll sort of start to hint at the so what, why all of this matters. And it can be really, really big and broad here. But it's just to sort of get us ready for like the overall payoff of your argument at the end. So again, we can look at what that looks like. And if we just break it up and read through this, you'll notice that actually they start here. I will first go into this, that's their first section, then second section, I will talk about this, and finally, third section, I will do this. And then, so you can see that they start here with their like roadmap, and then they move into their so what. Through these methods, I will show that biologists can apply these deep sea animal adaptations, not just to marine life, but also animals around the globe. Okay, cool, fantastic, wonderful. But what we don't do is talk about how they're going to prove their thesis. And so as you can look at this, you can start to notice that something is missing. And I can just add this in, you know, by comparing biological analyses of deep sea life with ecological assessments. I will explain how these creatures provide new insights into evolutionary processes and possibilities. Cool. We're just trying to sort of get at kind of our evidence base. Is it perfect? No. It could do another round of revision. But you could put it at the beginning, you could put it after the yellow. I don't know that it totally makes sense after the blue part, TBH, but where it goes is up to you. But this is sort of, again, the goal that you're trying to move for. Then we get into our conclusion. Our conclusion is what we've been doing all semester. It's 3 basic questions. What did you prove? And that's restating your thesis in about 1 to 2 sentences. For a research paper, it could be longer. Oops, my bad. How did you prove it? This is just sort of a reverse outline, roadmap. It's just summarizing your paragraphs, but going into more depth and being more specific. Whereas the roadmap in your introduction is going to be fairly, well, it'll be reflective of what you're talking about, but kind of broad. You can be more specific here. You can do more reflection here. You can talk about what like you actually think a little bit more here, just because we've read the entire paper and so we kind of know everything. And then finally, why does it matter? This is going to be the most important part of your conclusion. And this is going to be, why do I care? Why is this important? Why is this something we need to care about? What do we not know still? What do we need to keep knowing? Why is this relevant for our everyday life? And that might be 5 to 7 sentences. It could be its own paragraph. It could be a couple paragraphs, because again, that's the most important part. And if you want to look at how that essay does it, you can go look at the first batch of example essays for the research paper. It's example number 2. And if you have any questions for me, please email me at kbolt@elgin.edu. I'd be more than happy to help you out. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.